Hi, my name is Elizabeth McPherson, and for my historical topics assignment, I'm going to cover some of the details of Brown versus Board of Education and the historical implications it has for special education. So I just wanted to share those with you here today and show you a little bit about what I'm going to be researching. So the first thing is to talk about the question that I'm really going to look at. So here is the detailed question. In what ways did Brown versus Board of Education set the framework for laws and regulations established in the postmodern and modern eras regarding individuals with disabilities? So the whole point of looking at Brown versus Board of Education is really to assess what guidelines did Brown versus Board of Education kind of set in motion, and how has that made implications for individuals with disabilities now in the subsequent years. So in order to kind of understand what it's doing for special education, it's important to know what Brown versus Board really was. So here are some kind of fast facts that give us a little bit of an overview of what Brown versus Board of Education was. So we kind of went with a who, what, where, why, and when feel. So the big who of the Brown versus Board of Education is that there was a gentleman, Oliver Brown, who filed a class action suit against the Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas. He did this because his daughter was denied entry into a Topeka school. Now, she was a student of color. The school was an all-white school, and so she was denied entrance into the school based on her race. And so what happened is that this case, which was kind of the leading driving force in this Brown versus Board case, joined with 4 other cases. So there were 5 cases total, and it really aimed to look at this separate but equal kind of mentality of the 14th Amendment. So the Supreme Court, based on arguments that segregation violated this 14th Amendment, did rule in the Browns' favor. So they ruled that denying students access to education was not equal. It was against the law, and it was against the idea that everyone is allowed to equal protection from the law. So it was located in the Topeka School District area. However, this ruling that schools could not deny entrance or kind of segregate based on race really would go on to affect the entire nation. It would change kind of the framework of schools in general. So the big why, why did this need to happen? Segregation was technically allowed, but, the separate but equal mentality, really the basis of this case was to look at that separate but equal education, to really decide when we're separated, is the opportunity equal? And the answer to that question was no. Separation was not providing equal education. And so this ruling in Brown versus Board started the wheels turning on this thought that separating people by, category was not providing equitable education opportunities. And again, this was that consolidation of 5 separate cases. And so all of these rulings started to really encourage people to understand what was really happening. This was in the early 1950s. The actual Brown versus Board came in 1954. So since over these last 60, 70 years, we've really been making progress in understanding what equitable education looks like. So to think about its impact on special education, the big picture is that this was a civil rights movement. This was an issue of race inequality, but because of that, it brought attention to equitability for any kid, for any difference, especially kids with disabilities. So there were 2 main cases that followed Brown versus Board. One was called Park versus Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That was in 1970. And then in 72, Mill versus Board of Education. And really these used that Brown ruling to say, if the Brown versus Board of Education said that discrimination on race was not equitable, then we cannot discriminate based on gender, on age, or disability either. And so these cases, along with Brown of Education, really kind of set the wheels turning. There were about 27 or so federal court cases that happened after that, really putting pressure on education for all children. And then we started rolling in 1975 with this Individual Education Act, where it really emphasized free, appropriate education for all people, regardless of disability. So these are some of the resources I hope to use in my presentation. And kind of looking a little bit deeper into Brown versus Board of Education.